Welcome all to another episode of What's the Day Live. Today, the topic that we have is International Anti-Corruption Day. This is celebrated every year on 9th of December. And to bring more information and more insights on this topic and the day itself, I have with me Charles Key. For the uninitiated, he is a former Oklahoma State representative, and he's led the Oklahoma City Bombing Investigation Committee and has written Stolen Government and the Final Report. Basically, he's uncovered hidden truths about the system, about anti-corruption and other political events. So before we go into the day itself, right, Charles, one question I like to ask most of my guests is basically how has been your experience with the International Anti-Corruption Day itself? Have you ever celebrated it in the past, and how did you celebrate it? And then probably we can go into your experience itself.
Actually, I have not. I'm not really that aware of it. I probably have heard of it, but being focused in my world and what have you, I wasn't really that aware of it, to be honest with you. But I'm glad to learn about it because it's there's, like I've said, I've spent about 40 years of my adult life, which is practically all of it, in the political realm. And so what I've learned after being involved in it for a while and just learning even before going into politics, just human nature, whatever we see as corruption that's going on, we have to automatically think about it's to our advantage to think about there's much more going on that we don't know of yet, that we haven't been made aware of. So there's lots of corruption going on, a lot of problems that if we could solve them, it would make our world a better place and people would have justice and peace and harmony more than we do today.
So it's not the first time. I've had previous guests who've never heard about the day itself, and it's interesting to bring to perspective, right? So to tell you a little more about the day and to the listeners as well. So on 31st October of 2003, the United General Assembly adopted the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, and they requested that the Secretary General designate the UN Office for Drugs and Crime. So that office be designated as the secretariat for the conventions conference. Okay, so this is how it started almost 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, basically. And that's how the UN has tried to bring the fight to the world itself. Now, we know across the world, in some form or the other, governments have had this problem, but should the common man deal with it? You've been dealing it from inside the system, right? So how was it different? Did you have to have a fight outside, and then how did you take it inside the system?
Well, yeah, that's a great place to start because that's really the whole core of it all is the essence is where does corruption come from? How does it begin and start? What's the genesis of it? What's the motivation for people to be involved in corrupt activity? And oftentimes we find out that it's actually government itself, some elements within government or associated with government or government itself that is the perpetrator. And so when I've said that in the past and heard other people say it, sometimes people will say, well, are you anti-government because you're saying that? And the answer is absolutely not. I'm anti-corrupt government, just like I'm anti-corrupt human behavior in general. So I think it's real important that we realize that the source is not bad guys over there or something like that necessarily. The source is humanity. And how do we face that? And we've done that a lot. And that's one of the reasons we have a source of laws and in government itself. But we can't let government off the hook when it has corrupt behavior or incorrect policy or behavior, because those things can lead to corruption probably faster than most other things because we give government legitimacy. And when we do that, we have trust in it and we expect it to, be good and do good things, but it doesn't always do that.
Right. So obviously, greed is a very specific reason, right, where officials could get corrupt and things like that. But even when we face such officials, do people actually have the option, right? Because obviously India is infamous for a lot of systemic corruption, and several other countries are. It's not just India, and I have no clue how systemic it is in the US. If you want to shed some light on that, but then again, how does the person see if you face such an official? What is the first step that you should be taking?
Well, it'll depend on what country you live in and what kind of government you have, what kind
Mhm.
of freedom or ability that a typical citizen has, because as we all know, governments can do things to people just for raising questions about
Mhm.
things like we're
Yeah,
talking about.
yeah.
So one needs to be fully aware of that first. But for the United States, we've even see it get to that level recently, as people probably have observed the last few years.
Mhm.
Government officials that are putting people in jail for things that they don't have any legal right to do.
Correct.
But the thing about government is its actions are based in either legal right or sometimes or power. So we
Right.
give them this power. So we need to be careful and be cognizant of that fact that when we give government power and or the ability to do things, then they're going to have the force of law, and many citizens will stand back and let them do almost anything they want to do. And that's not a good thing, because that's the ultimate source of force behind criminal behavior. Is when you have a lot of power, you can do a lot of damage. So, in here in the United States, for example, we had a founding father, one of our first presidents. It was Thomas Jefferson.
Yep.
Probably my favorite quote of people like that. He said, "In matters of power, let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down with the chains of the Constitution." And
Right.
that was at our founding time that he said that. But the overall concept is, you know, we've got to stop holding people up to a high level. It
Mhm.
doesn't mean we bring them down to a low level. We all are on the same level.
Yeah.
So back to equality, we have to treat each other with equality, but we also have to realize that, back to humans are the ultimate problem when we have stuff like this going on.
Yeah.
And so it's important that we know the rules, and the rules apply to everyone equally, and we hold each other accountable for holding the rules or not. And that's the first step. In the United States, they did this 250 years ago when it first started, and still yet our government has become more corrupt over time. Or to put it another way, they have gone outside the boundaries of law that's been set up to hold them down. Like Jefferson said, to bind them down. And so when they start getting out of hand, you've got to call it out, or it'll just get worse and worse.
But then every government strives to reduce corruption, at least on the surface or face value level, right? They bring tougher and tougher laws and things like that to prevent corruption. But then, how is it that, I mean, how have you seen it actually becoming even worse despite the laws existing? I mean, people do have ways
Well,
to, but then I'm just talking from a very dumb perspective. If somebody wanted to,
well, here's something, I'll plug my book.
mm-hmm,
I'm retired effectively, but I'm still working in the political realm. I don't need to sell books. This
mm-hmm,
one is just at 100 pages. It's easy to read, and it
yeah,
gets to a real big issue that's not just probably unique in America,
mm-hmm,
but probably around the world. And it goes to the issue of the rules under which governments or legislative bodies work and operate under. So they have people may have heard of Mason's rules or Robert's rules of order,
mm-hmm.
or just legislative rules. You have to raise your hand, and you can't just
Yeah,
speak if you want to. So
mm-hmm,
we try to put order in this American system. Well, what's happened over time is we we elect people to go represent us. I'm trying to simplify this. We elect people to go represent us in our House of Representatives or our Congress or our Senate.
Yeah.
And then we find out as time goes by, those people aren't really able to really represent the people that sent them up there.
Okay.
Because the system that they've now become a part of, a legislature, or a Congress, has rules, and you have to adhere to those rules or you won't be able to participate fully. And so one of the rules and this book is all about one rule, just one rule that's abused. It's a rule in which it allows the top person and whoever his leadership team is, we call them chairmen of committees and people like that. It lets them say to somebody like you or me that just got elected to go represent people, they can say to the representatives, no, we're not going to let you be heard. We're not going to let you speak about a bill or let your bills be heard that come from the people. And so when that happens, you're actually, it's like putting duct tape on your mouth or tying your arms around. You can't do what you're supposed to do. And so that's why I wrote the book. I spent 18 years in our Oklahoma legislature. And when I got there, I found out this practice was going on, and I thought, this is crazy. How can you do this? And so I've been fighting it ever since. And we're finally getting to a point where we're going to put a law in place here in Oklahoma that prohibits that from happening.
Okay.
But
then again,
it started with somebody like me, and there's always a few in a body. There's 101 members in our House of Representatives. It started with somebody like me getting up and saying, wait a minute, I object. This practice is wrong and should be changed. You have to stand up and speak and fight against it. And it's been a long time that I've been doing that, a very long time.
Yeah.
And it's finally getting somewhere. I wasn't doing only this all these many years, but it takes a long time to change these practices because people that want to use the system to their own benefit, whether they're in government or out of government, we could call them lobbyists. They are there working full time to get what they want. And so that rubs against what the will of the people is in a representative form of government or a democracy, as we call it, et cetera, et cetera.
So the system, right? There are people inside and outside the system, and there will be new people joining in, right? Whether it be from inside or outside, and some will have the feeling of working for the people, and then there will be some who will be wanting to working for themselves, right? And it is these people working for themselves that try to exploit the whole system with corruption and things like that. But then if somebody wants to work for the people, how does that person set up the whole system to work with them rather than against them? I think that's something you've been doing.
I don't know India or some of the other countries in that part of the world enough about their government to know the answer to this question. But I know in America, and what I've talked about so far is when you get elected, you have to deal with the rules and the lay of the land, so to speak, as it is there, where you just became a member of it. So it's really not easy. And I've seen others do this too, where they'll get up and they'll fight the system. And when you don't go along with it from the beginning, then you're going to be stigmatized or labeled, and it'll be hard for you to get things done because the leadership, the people that have bought into this concept and they're part of it and they're looking out for them more than they're looking out for other people, they will marginalize you. So that's just a natural thing. But the best way, another good way to do it is somebody needs to find others within and without government, in and out of government, that have the same mindset and are willing to work for the same goals.
Yeah.
And that is very powerful right there. Then you have multiple people And as you know, and we all know, when we have others around us that think like we do, we can join together as a group and we can get more done. And so that's the way it has to be approached. So, um, and you need to be threatening. The group needs to be threatening, not in their words so much, but let other duly elected members of the legislative body know that you're very serious about this and you're going to work to defeat them in their districts if they work against these concepts of openness. Because ultimately what we have to have openness and transparency so people can see everything that's as much as possible is going on in their government.
Yeah. So if we talk about the people, right? Now the UN this year came up with the theme for the whole event, right? The International Anti-Corruption Day. So the campaign this year, it focuses on the role of young guardians who are getting into the system, and for them to act on integrity, and they should be playing as advocates. Okay. The young people should be raising awareness about corruption and its impact on the communities. As you talked about communities, right? They have a very integral role to play when it comes to fighting anything, be it the lack of transparency or corruption. These two things go hand in hand, right? That is how the whole thing falls apart. If the government is trying to hide something, it means there is a problem that's there, right? That's taken for granted, and that's how things are supposed to be. uh, I mean, they fall into place. I mean, they're not supposed to be like that, but then again, just trying to play with words here, but then again, so that's how things are. But how do you take them to be?
Well, yeah, it's this just the way it is, but I think people also need to know that you have to attack problems, especially if it's government. If it's
Mhm.
private, if it's private corruption, you're going to have the same problems. You know, people don't like to be exposed. But in government, you know, the thing that really drives it is elections, getting elected, the perception of doing good things. So it's hard for us voters to know who's doing the good things and who's not, you know, or who's playing both sides maybe.
Yeah.
And so, you know, being aware of what's going on, become more and more knowledgeable of the players, the rules, the laws, all that kind of stuff. You have to know all that, but you really need to create an organization, whether it's formal or informal, of like-minded people that want to accomplish things like openness and transparency. Who could be against that? You know, really, hardly anybody could be against those things.
Yeah.
So it should be a very popular thing. But one thing I learned in politics for all these years is kind of like Trump's the art of the deal. There's one thing to make deals, you know, and learn how to work with people. It's
Hmm.
another thing to create the perception of
Yeah.
something. And
Hmm.
we all know politics and government is really
All about
big
the
about
perception.
that. And so people need to become aware of that. I'm going to say again, the book that I mentioned is it's the reason that I wrote about the subject in such a singular, simplistic way. This issue had been a larger issue here in Oklahoma for a
Hmm.
long time. And so we originally wrote a smaller booklet. It was smaller than this one
Okay.
to use as a campaign strategy for people, just general education. But then I wanted to get into it a little bit deeper when I wrote this book earlier this year. And I wanted to talk about the money because the money is a very big part of it. But I also wanted to talk about here in our country, the federal level. The
Hmm.
federal level is the worst of all of them.
Oh,
But
okay.
so as I wrote this book, I chose to not get into the money part of it or not get into the federal side because this subject matter about rules and stuff is boring to most people,
Hmm.
even people that are interested in politics. So I knew that if I got into too much of that, it could cause the eyes to glaze over and people to lose interest. I want them to understand that this one power that some leaders of legislatures have to just choose. So we elect all these people that go up and represent us every election cycle. in Oklahoma, there's 101 members in our House, so it's a good
Yeah.
even number.
Mm-hmm.
So we elect every 2 years 101 members to go up and represent
Okay.
us. But the truth is, they cannot actually do it fully, because if you get elected here in Oklahoma and you go up, take the oath of office like a bunch of other people, and then you have legislation that you actually file
Mm.
to address problems that maybe your constituents want you to do. But
Right.
then you have but then you have one other member that got elected just like you did, that somebody made him a chairman of a committee, and he says, I'm not going to hear your bill, period. And you
Right.
say, what? Why not? I just don't want to. Or he may give you another reason. It might be somebody else doesn't want it or something, but it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter. He's not going to hear your bill.
Right.
So it's like, that's why I mentioned like duct tape. If you can't speak, in the US, we have the Bill of Rights, and
Yes.
if the First Amendment is free speech, freedom of religion, and also the freedom to redress government, to come to government and say, hey, we got to fix this problem, or you got to stop doing that. How can you redress government if you can't even speak about the problems? And so I would bet that every government has this problem to some degree. Um, the democracies of the world, I'll have it in the way that we're talking about it. We still elect people, we still send people up there. We trust that everything's going, in a good way. But the reality is there's some of these nuanced aspects of the system that are the way in which they control everything. The reason they do it is because it's special interest groups and big money donors behind the scenes
Right.
that are deciding what they do and don't want to become
Mhm.
public policy, political policy. It's that simple. And we've caught them many times at saying that in an open way, where lots of people hear them say things and confess that. So it's always part of a system, and you have to work to change it, or your world won't get better. It'll get worse, probably. you know.
Talking about elections, right? Here in India, obviously, corruption becomes an issue election after election after election. Some governments do address the crimes that were conducted in the past governments. They do address it, but then sometimes it does not happen. It becomes a part of the court system. The case keeps going on and on. How is it there? Have you seen corruption being a issue in the election, that it is very actively discussed, and is it a part of public discourse? Should it be more actively discussed? um, Something
Absolutely. I
else.
mean, it might be probably the first issue ahead of this one that we're talking about right now.
Hmm.
And that is, if you can't have a fair election,
Yeah.
if it's not free and fair, as they say, then the rest of it doesn't really matter after that much,
Right.
because it's an illusion.
Hmm.
And so in America here, we've had a lot of publicity the last few years about corruption in the elections, cheating
Okay.
and stuff like that. And it's real. It's for certain that it's going on. Um, Here in Oklahoma, we're fortunate. Of all of the electronic voting machines, we have one here, and it's the best of all the electronics. And I'm convinced of that because I've been part of it when we've
Right.
analyzed it.
Hmm.
But still, I happen to be one, as some are, I wish more were, in
Hmm.
favor of doing away with all electronic voting. I think we need to go back to paper ballots, hand them in, and the people count them at that location.
Okay.
My understanding is that France and Taiwan, and I've heard of another country or two that went back to paper ballots after trying electronic systems,
Hmm.
because they again found the corruption that, like we're talking about, too much corruption, too much ability to cheat.
Right.
So you
We've
you
been
have to
Yeah,
go
yeah.
ahead.
No, I mean, we've been having that debate for quite some time. It's been, I think, 2+ decades since we've had the introduction of EVMs, the electronic voting machines. Uh, they have a mixed review. I mean, in many cases, the losing party complains that the elections have been rigged. But since we have a lot of elections going on around the country, we had two major state elections just a few days ago. That votes were counted in one party won, and the other state was won by the other group of parties. So in essence, nobody had anything to complain about, right? They both won in different states. So obviously, there was one state that was bigger. So the loser party was trying to say that this election was rigged, but the other was not. So, which is technically, say, it's, I mean, that's a part of debate. But then again, so corruption is something that everybody has to deal with on a systemic level. To put it a little more on a personal level, right? Is there something that you did before you were a part of the system? Like before you joined as a state representative, was there something that hurt you, or was it bothering you that brought you
No,
onto this path?
actually, this issue about the book, the rules,
Mm-hmm.
two answers to your question. First of all, when I first got elected, I was 30 years old.
All
And
right.
so, but I had a really good education. And in addition to having a good education, I had a real interest in our history, not just of the US, but world history and ancient history. And grew up in the church, a Christian church, and we went to church all the time. So we studied the Bible all the time. So I had all this knowledge and real kind of a zeal for, those high
Nice.
ideals. But I didn't know anything about the rules. It was
Mhm.
something I just probably, like most people, put it aside as, yeah, everybody's got to have some rules when there's a group of people and they're all going to get
Yeah.
together and talk. Everybody can't talk at one time. So I didn't give it much more thought than that. When I got there, I was shocked when a chairman actually said to me, and it happened many times after that for all those years,
Okay.
a chairman said, I'm just not going to hear your bill,
Okay.
for whatever reason. And I thought, this is absolutely crazy. This is antithetical to what the American system of government is supposed to be all about. And it
Right.
is.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just blew my mind. And I got really, started looking into how do I change this? And so I went to the House staff and got up to speed on the rules, the laws, and how you change those. As a practical matter in the US, you change a rule that the legislature operates under just like you change a law. The
Right.
rules, the rules are not laws, but
Mm-hmm.
they're dealt with like laws. So you have to draft a bill that says no one can stop another duly elected member from having their legislation heard. No one can say no to them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're going to bring into effect here in the state of Oklahoma, is we're going to prohibit that practice outright. Think about this for a second. Here's another thought. If if we go to elections and we vote for and against people based on what we think they will do, but also many of them who are already there. So we're voting for or against an incumbent. Well, if you can't look at the record of that incumbent, if you can't see how they voted, if you can't see the other things they've done,
Mm-hmm.
then you can't get a clear picture of whether they're doing the right thing for you and they deserve your vote. And so what'll happen with this practice is sometimes a member like me might go to you and you might be a chairman of a committee and I'll say, hey, I've got this bill over here. A constituent wanted me to run it. I didn't really want to. I think it's a stupid idea. It's bad. I don't like it, but I didn't want to say no to my constituent. If you'll just kind of wink, wink and tell me you're not going to hear my bill, then I can go back and tell my constituent that bad chairman of that committee said no, he wouldn't hear the bill. I tried to get it heard, but I couldn't. That happens all the time. We had the one time this issue has ever been brought out on the House floor. I brought it out because I'm the author of it. It was in 2011, first
Okay.
day of session. And so we had members of the leadership team against it. So they got up and debated against it. And one of the members, one of my Republican fellow members, got up and said exactly what I just said on the floor. He said, we need those committee chairmen so we can go to them sometimes and say, wink, wink. I don't like this bill my constituent wanted me to run. So if you just tell me you won't hear it, I'll go and parenthetically lie to them. And tell them you won't hear it. And he said it on the floor. It's still on our website now. People could go hear this person say that. I'm just
Yeah.
making a big issue of it because it is a big issue.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't hear people say that very often. And they get away with it because not enough people are paying attention.
Right.
When people pay attention and they catch this kind of behavior and what have you, they can tell other people and it will get other people's attention. And then you can start moving to change something like that.
That's right. I mean, when people try to stop you from doing something which is actually good, that is where you start to recognize patterns of opaqueness, and then you have issues of corruption being the reasons for such things, right? And then the whole system tries to protect itself, and that is where the whole issue of a government becoming atrocious simply because they want to protect their own interest gets into in front of the people, right? And that's how revolutions are born and things like that. So yeah,
Mm.
thanks for that. I mean, the International Anti-Corruption Day is all about discussions like these where we can talk about and make people aware about such issues and then bring it to light and make them bring it into public discourse, right? And that is how things will get better with time. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me on this episode of What's the Day Live. For the audience, if you liked it, if you have some comments, do leave them in the comment section. And then if you want to share it, if you feel that somebody else should also listen to this, do share it ahead. Thank you so much. Thanks, Charles.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.